on World News Tonight. International warning. United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres slams Russia's referendum move, citing it violates the UN Charter. Tables turned. The U.S. Department of Justice gets the green light to probe into a classified document taken from Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. Tensions rising. The U.S. sends an aircraft carrier to join the Republic of Korea's military trainings in order to intimidate North Korea. Season of fluff. Harvesting begins in China's Xinjiang region, which is the country's largest cotton growing area.
This is Derana World News Tonight. Reporting from Colombo, here is Anuradhi Vikramasinghe.
Good evening and thank you for joining us on World News. We begin tonight with the update of the UN. The UN head Antonio Guterres, in a statement to the Security Council, stated his distaste towards Russia's future plans on the annexation of Ukrainian territories under the guise of referendums. He further stated that any such action would be a blatant violation of the Charter of the United Nations.
At a meeting of the United Nations Security Council focused on the bitter and bloody conflict in Ukraine, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned Russia that plans to annex Ukrainian territory under the guise of referendums in Russian-held areas would violate the UN Charter.
Any annexation of a state's territory by another state resulting from a threat or use of force is a violation of the UN Charter and of international law.
Russia said it plans to hold referendums in the upcoming days in parts of Ukraine it seized since the start of its invasion some 7 months ago. Those territories comprise almost 15% of Ukraine. On Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced plans to call up some 300,000 reservists for combat and made a thinly veiled threat to use nuclear weapons to defend the country. Guterres said nuclear threats were unacceptable.
The idea of nuclear conflict, once unthinkable, has become a subject of debate. This, in itself, is totally unacceptable.
Much of the Security Council meeting Thursday focused on alleged atrocities committed in Ukraine.
And I went to Bucha and went behind St. Andrew's Church. The bodies I saw were not fake.
International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan told the council that there were, quote, reasonable grounds to believe crimes within the jurisdiction of the court had been committed in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the Security Council of a mass grave where victims showed signs of torture.
One site contains some 440 unmarked graves. A number of the bodies unearthed there so far reportedly show signs of torture, including one victim with broken arms and a rope around his neck.
Russia denies committing war crimes as part of what it terms a, quote, special military operation. On Thursday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov defended his country's military actions, claiming that Ukraine, in fact, had sparked the conflict by threatening Russia and repeating Moscow's justifications for sending their forces into their smaller neighbor.
Everything I've said today simply confirms that the decision to conduct the special military operation was inevitable.
Lavrov left after speaking. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba spoke to reporters ahead of the Security Council meeting. When asked about being in the same room as Lavrov, he responded,
I will keep safe social distance with him.
As the war in Ukraine escalates, the EU continues to work on sanction packages against the Russian Federation. This comes mostly after President Putin's threat of nuclear blackmail to anyone threatening the safety of the Russian populace, which caused tensions to fly high all over the West.
The EU is working on a 7th sanctions package against Russia following Putin's announcement he'll support 4 illegal referendums in Ukraine with the view to annexing the regions. The package is likely to target specific sectors such as aviation and prohibiting exports of technologies important for Russian industry. Several Russian citizens will also be included. Speaking in Princeton University, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said sanctions against Russia are now biting.
If you look at the financial sector in Russia, it's on life support now. Russia's industry is in tatters. It's very interesting to see the military complex, because the military complex now has a very hard time to replenish what is necessary for the armed forces, because the updated technologies are missing. These are coming from our side and no more delivered. There's a ban on the exports. The spare parts are missing. So you observe now that the Russians are cannibalizing their refrigerators and their dishwashers to get semiconductors they can use for the military complex. Basically, the Kremlin has put Russia's economy on the path of oblivion.
At the UN General Assembly in New York, EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell blamed Russia for dragging the world into a global recession and global food crisis. Alongside sanctions, he said the EU will support the International Criminal Court to ensure justice and accountability against the Russian regime.
Former US President Donald Trump faces even more trouble as federal courts rule that the United States Justice Department is free to review classified documents seized from Trump's home after previously being barred from such actions.
Tonight, the latest legal setback for former President Trump. A federal appeals court ruling the Justice Department is free to resume reviewing 100 classified documents seized from Mar-a-Lago, reversing an earlier decision by a federal judge that had blocked the government from examining those materials. Mr. Trump overnight insisting he declassified the records, an argument his lawyers have not made in court.
It doesn't have to be a process, as I understand it. If you're the President of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it.
But the appeals court brushed off that argument as a red herring, saying the documents are still government property, whether or not they were declassified. Then there's the new $250 million civil lawsuit against Mr. Trump, as well as Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric Trump, brought by New York's Attorney General Letitia James. Mr. Trump slamming the suit by James, a Democrat, as a politically motivated witch hunt.
She campaigned on it 4 years ago. It was a vicious campaign, and she just talked about Trump, and we're going to indict him, we're going to get him.
James is accusing Mr. Trump of inflating his assets to get more favorable loans and better tax rates.
The pattern of fraud and deception that was used by Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization for their own financial benefit is astounding.
One example she cites, Mr. Trump's 212-acre estate outside Manhattan, bought for $7.5 million, that was later valued at nearly $300 million, on what James says were false claims that it had been zoned for mansions. But Mr. Trump argues the banks were responsible for their own valuations.
These are banks that have the best law firms in the world, the biggest and best and most powerful. They do their own work. They don't rely on us.
While some in Australia spent most of last week mourning Queen Elizabeth II, others marched in anti-monarchy protests, the reason for which is due to King Charles III, who is highly unpopular amongst Australians and is now the head of state of the country due to Australia still being a dominion under the Crown of Great Britain.
A moment of silence was observed in Australia's Parliament House to honour former Queen Elizabeth II. The packed room included the sovereign's representative there, other dignitaries, and the country's Prime Minister, who had just returned to the country from attending the Queen's funeral in person on Monday.
Perhaps the greatest tribute we can offer her family and her memory is not a marble statue or a metal plaque. It is a renewed embrace of service to community, a truer understanding of our duty to others, a stronger commitment to respect for all.
The sentiment was not shared across the country. On Thursday, anti-monarchy rallies attracted thousands of people, and protesters tried to draw attention to the harm British colonizers caused Indigenous Australians and its lasting effects to this day.
She signed during her time of reign was, if you go back through the legal documents and all the documents that incarcerated our people, it was her signature that was on them. And so she's not innocent in no way, shape or form.
Australia is one of the few former British colonies that never struck a treaty with its Indigenous population, though the country is planning to change its constitution through a referendum that would give the population a greater say on the politics that affect their lives.
Japan's central bank said it would keep rates unchanged and ultra low because the nation's economy still needed support. By doing this, the economy would be spending more instead of saving, which would in turn cause the yen to plummet as a result of this possible blunder of economic monetary policy.
Japan is defying a global trend. The country's central bank on Thursday said it would keep rates unchanged and ultra low. That's in contrast with its peers. Only a day earlier, the US Federal Reserve delivered a third straight increase and signalled more to come. Bank of Japan Governor Haruhiko Kuroda says the country's economy still needs support to recover from the global health crisis.
There's absolutely no change to our stance of maintaining easy monetary policy for the time being. we won't be raising interest rates for the time being.
Japan now has markedly lower rates than other major economies, and that is punishing the yen. The Japanese currency sank to a fresh 24-year low against the dollar following Thursday's news. Within hours, officials said they had intervened in currency markets to prop up the yen. It's the first time that's happened since 1998. Kuroda said the BOJ would play its part too.
Recent yen falls make it difficult for firms to set business plans and heighten uncertainty about the future. They are negative and undesirable for Japan's economy. The Bank of Japan will coordinate closely with the government and closely monitor the currency market moves and the impact they have on the economy and prices.
The dollar plunged around 2% against the yen immediately after the news of the intervention. However, it later recovered some ground, and analysts doubt whether Tokyo can halt the yen's slide for long. Authorities didn't say how much they had spent supporting the currency or whether Washington had consented to the move.
Let's go in for a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. Foreign ministers from Seoul, Washington and Tokyo met to discuss regional and global issues, where they underscored the importance of their trilateral partnership. The meeting took place as the nations met in New York for the 77th UNGA session.
The top diplomats of South Korea, the US and Japan sat down for a three-way meeting in New York on Thursday. Speaking beforehand, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken highlighted the importance of the cooperation that exists between the three countries.
The United States, Japan, Korea, we have the most vital bilateral relationships, but we also have this trilateral partnership. And
he also highlighted how vital the partnership is in order to tackle regional and global issues. This is the first meeting of its kind in about 2 months since the three met in Bali on the sidelines of the G20 foreign ministers meeting in July. After the meeting, which lasted for about an hour, Seoul's Foreign Minister Park Jin told reporters that the three countries share the same view with regard to the need to coordinate closely to tackle threats from North Korea. He then added that the meeting was successful and served as an opportunity to improve bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo.
With tensions rising in the Pacific over the DPRK proclaiming themselves a nuclear state, the US sent one of their aircraft carriers to join South Korea in the show of military strength, with the aim of intimidating North Korea.
A US aircraft carrier arrived in South Korea on Friday for the first time in 4 years. It will join South Korean ships in a military show of force, which officials say aims to send North Korea a message. USS Ronald Reagan and ships from its accompanying strike force docked at a naval base in the southern port city of Busan. US Strike Group Commander Rear Admiral Michael Donnelly said the US is standing firmly by South Korea.
So we leave the messaging to the diplomats. Our interactions with ROK Navy are tactically purposeful in developing interoperability to ensure credible combat power. And opportunity for us to practice our tactics and operations and to demonstrate that we stand together.
Its arrival is the biggest development yet, under a new push to have more US nuclear-capable strategic assets up and running in the area to deter the North. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol wants more joint military exercises as a warning to Kim Jong-un, after North Korea conducted a record number of missile tests this year. Analysts believe Pyongyang appears to be getting ready to resume nuclear testing for the first time since 2017, after previous talks failed to persuade North Korea to end its nuclear program. In the past, North Korea has denounced previous joint drills as rehearsals for war and proof of hostility from Washington and Seoul.
With Italy's far right on a victory path, this year's elections will be even more special due to citizens ranging from 18 to 24 getting the opportunity to vote in the elections for the first time in the country's history.
On Sunday, Italians will head to the polls to elect a new government.
But for the first time in history, those aged between 18 and 24 will enjoy full voting rights. Last year, the minimum voting age for the Upper House Senate was lowered from 25 to 18. So what do Italy's first-time voters want? Oscar and Francesco are just two voices, but they're among 4.1 million people who have just been given the right to vote. And with the youth vote now more important than ever,
Ciao ragazzi, eccomi qua.
The big parties have been targeting them via TikTok with generous promises ranging from outlawing unpaid internships, introducing a minimum wage, and help with rent and tuition costs. Despite this, pollsters expect a sizable number to abstain. And they're also anticipating a rightist coalition led by the Nationalist Brothers of Italy party to be on course for a clear victory. Leader Giorgia Meloni could be the likely choice to be the country's first female prime minister. Sunday's election follows the fall of Prime Minister Mario Draghi's National Unity government, brought down by party infighting in July.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid called for a two-state solution of decades of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and reasserted that Israel would do whatever it takes to stop Iran from developing a nuclear bomb.
In his address to the UN General Assembly, Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid appeared to tender an olive branch to the Palestinians and to rekindle the long-dormant two-state solution. And Lapid, who took office just under 3 months ago, said he had much of Israel on his side, though with one caveat.
Despite all the obstacles, still today, a large majority of Israelis support the vision of the two-state solution. I am one of them. We have only one condition: that the future Palestinian state will be a peaceful one.
But the speech was barely over before one of Lapid's predecessors, Benjamin Netanyahu, strongly criticised it. He said Lapid was bringing the Palestinians back to the forefront of the world stage and putting Israel right into the Palestinian pit. Netanyahu added it would create a terrorist state in the heart of the country. Israel's leaders have largely moved away in recent years from the idea of a two-state solution, though Netanyahu himself did endorse it 6 years ago at the United Nations.
I remain committed to a vision of peace based on two states for two peoples.
But whatever the change in tack by Lapid, the two-state solution remains far off, as mutual distrust between Israelis and Palestinians is as acute as ever. Israel has long accused the Palestinians of not wanting peace, while the Palestinians, for their part, point to Israel's continued building of settlements on occupied land in the West Bank.
Welcome back, and for more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Floods caused by heavy rain disrupted traffic and inundated major highways in several cities across northern India. Britain formally lifted a moratorium on fracking for shale gas that has been in place since 2019, saying strengthening the country's energy supply was an absolute priority. Hundreds of demonstrators, including students, protested outside Parliament House in Wellington, demanding more action on climate change, joining other countries in global protests. Bermudians boarded up windows and stocked up on groceries as Hurricane Fiona drew nearer after causing several deaths and leaving many people without power in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Tesla is recalling roughly 1.1 million vehicles in the US. This follows reports by US safety regulators showing that people's fingers could be pinched by the car's windows when closing. And that is all from us here at World News Tonight. Join us again on Monday as we keep you up to date with the latest from around the world. In case you missed any of the stories tonight, you can rewatch our whole program on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/OtherDerana-English. We're leaving you tonight with fields filled with cotton being plucked as the harvest season begins in China. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.